I had always trusted him. Every laugh, every whispered "I love you," every quiet moment in our shared apartment felt like proof that we were unbreakable. I thought I knew him, thought I understood the rhythm of his heart, but I was wrong. I discovered the truth in the most unbearable way imaginable. It was a Sunday morning when the call came. The voice on the other end belonged to a neighbor, trembling with hesitation. I don't know how to tell you this," she said, "but he's gone, and he's not at home," and my chest tightened. I thought she meant an accident, something mundane that could be explained, but the words that followed shattered my entire world. He passed away in her bed, the one you didn't know about. I didn't hear anything else. The phone slipped from my hand as if gravity itself wanted me to fall apart. The world tilted, and every breath became a jagged piece of glass cutting through my lungs. My husband, the man I had shared a decade with, the father of my quiet dreams and stolen kisses, had been lying lifeless in the arms of another woman. A stranger, my world had become a nightmare painted in cruel betrayal. The drive to her apartment was a blur. I don't remember stopping at red lights. I don't remember the faces of people who passed me on the street. All I remember was that bed, that room, the life he had been living without me. I arrived to find police tape and murmuring officers, and her face stone, cold, almost unapologetic. The air smelled of flowers and perfume, but beneath it lingered the bitterness of deceit. The funeral was a theater of grief and pretense. His family, people I had once called relatives by extension, treated me like an intruder in their carefully rehearsed sorrow. But there was no mourning for him that I could recognize. Instead, I felt their eyes on me, not with sympathy, but with calculation. The moment they discovered I controlled the finances, the tone shifted. "Your card," his sister said sharply, not even hiding the expectation in her eyes. "We need it. Everything has to be taken care of. The funeral costs, the house." Their demands weren't laced with comfort or concern. They were commands, as if my loss was secondary to their convenience. I stood there, my body trembling, my mind screaming. How dare they? How dare they think I would be their wallet, their lifeline, their problem? Solver after the man they pretended to mourn had betrayed me so completely. A storm rose inside me, grief so sharp it burned, betrayal so deep it felt like ice piercing my chest. But under that storm, a quiet, fierce resolve began to take root. I remembered our years together, the breakfasts we shared, the arguments we resolved, the nights he held me when I cried. And I remembered the lies, the secret glances, the messages I would never see until now. For the first time, I understood that my heartbreak was also my liberation. He was gone, and they, who demanded my money, were not entitled to a single penny of my sorrow. That night, I sat alone in the house we had built together. Every corner whispered his absence, every picture mocked the truth. I thought of the house, the car, the life we had shared, and a cold clarity settled over me. I would not be a victim. I would not hand over my heart, my security, my life, to a family that had no right to it. By the time I went to bed, my tears had dried, leaving only a simmering fire. I didn't know how yet, but I knew that I would reclaim my power. I would honor my grief by turning it into something they could never touch, something unassailable, something mine. And in that dark, quiet room, with the shadows of betrayal dancing on the walls, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end of me. This is the beginning of my reckoning." The days after the funeral were suffocating. The house felt too quiet, the air heavy with the scent of lilies and wax candles. People came and went, offering hollow condolences, their faces carefully schooled in grief. But his family, his so-called family, treated me not as a widow, but as a resource, an ATM disguised in skin and sorrow. His sister, the one with her sharp suits and sharper tongue, arrived first. She stepped inside like she owned the space, her eyes scanning every corner as if measuring its value. "We need your card," she said flatly, as though I had agreed to give it. "Funeral expenses, the house, the utilities, everything." She didn't ask. She demanded. I could barely breathe. "Excuse me." My voice sounded foreign even to me. "You heard me." She replied, as if repeating it would make me understand my duty. "You can't do this alone. You'll need help, and that means access to your accounts." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The audacity, the entitlement. Did they not feel the sting of betrayal themselves? Did they not mourn the man who had hidden a life from me? But no, grief had nothing to do with it. Greed did, and suddenly the hypocrisy of it all became blinding. Every day brought another relative, another demand. The brother who had once called me sister looked at me with calculating eyes, as if trying to figure out which of my assets he could inherit by proxy. They spoke in terms of numbers, accounts, property, never memories, never love. The house we had filled with laughter and late-night whispers was now a stage for their avarice. I remembered the morning he had smiled at me in the kitchen, the soft way he had brushed a strand of hair from my face. And I remembered now, in bitter contrast, the hidden texts, the whispered lies, the secret life he had built on the side. His betrayal had been sharp, but theirs, his family's entitlement, was corrosive. It was easier to be angry at them than to feel the jagged emptiness inside me. So I began to plan, quietly, strategically. There would be no shouting, no dramatic confrontations that could be used against me. They wanted my card, my money, my house, fine. I would give them nothing. I would turn their greed into frustration. They would see their plans crumble without ever realizing it was me behind it. In my mind, I started listing every asset, every account, every loophole, every piece of leverage. The house was theirs in appearance only. The bank accounts, they had no power over them. Their entitlement was their weakness, and I would exploit it with calm precision. I allowed myself a small, private smile. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt something that wasn't despair. I felt the flicker of control, a spark of quiet vengeance that didn't scream but promised justice in its own way. At night, when the house was empty, I would wander its rooms, touching the walls, remembering our life. The betrayal was a wound, but also a teacher. I realized that grief could sharpen the mind as much as it could break the heart, and I was learning to wield it. By the end of the week, I had made small changes, canceling automatic payments, not responding to their urgent requests immediately, letting them stew in their impatience while I calculated my next steps. Every message I ignored, every request I postponed, was a tiny reclamation of my power. And yet, beneath the strategy, the anger, the calculated defiance, there was still pain. Deep, raw, aching pain that no amount of revenge could erase. I cried alone at night, letting the grief wash over me, cleansing the part of me that had loved him despite his deceit. And as the tears dried, they left something new behind, clarity. The path was clear. They could try to take what was mine, but they would find that I had already moved beyond them. By the time the weekend ended, I had made a silent vow. I would reclaim everything he and they had tried to take. But I would do it in a way that honored my grief, my dignity, and the fire that had begun to burn inside me. Their entitlement would crumble without me ever lifting a hand in anger. And in that quiet, cold clarity, I realized revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about freedom. The morning I decided to act, the house seemed smaller, heavier, as if it knew change was coming. I woke before dawn, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the quiet rooms we had once shared. They were filled with memories, and yet none of it belonged to him anymore, not truly. His presence had been a lie. His family's demands were an intrusion, but my freedom, that was mine to seize. First, I began with the finances. His family had assumed that handing over my card was a given, a matter of course. They didn't know that I had already closed the account linked to their demands. I smiled when I imagined their faces as they realized the card they expected to control was already void, useless. Every phone call they made would meet silence. Every demand would bounce back against them. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to explain. Their frustration was a symphony of justice. Next came the house. The walls that had witnessed laughter and whispered confessions, the garden we had planted together, the bedroom where secrets had been shared, everything they assumed was theirs for the taking was about to slip from under their greedy hands. I contacted the real estate agent I had trusted long before him, the one who had seen me as a client, not a pawn. Within days, the house was on the market, perfectly staged, perfectly ready. The family noticed immediately. Calls came in the middle of the day, texts demanding to know what I was doing and why I hadn't consulted them. I didn't answer. I let them stew. Their entitlement clashed violently with their helplessness, and every day their voices grew sharper, more frantic. I relished the quiet power in watching them scramble. They had assumed that grief would make me pliable. They were wrong. Every step I took was deliberate. I reminded myself of the betrayal, of the cold, lifeless bed where he had passed away with someone else. I remembered his sister demanding my card, his brothers calculating glances, the way they had reduced me to a bank account. Those memories were fuel. They sharpened my actions, turning grief into precision, sadness into strategy. And yet, I didn't rush. I didn't let emotion cloud judgment. This wasn't a tantrum, it was a reclamation. The house sold for more than I expected, the buyers eager and unaware of the storm behind the walls. Every signature I signed, every finality I approved, was a silent declaration. I am no longer theirs to manipulate. The day the sale closed, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The silence was not sorrowful, it was triumphant. I paused in the kitchen, tracing the edge of the counter where he had once leaned against me during breakfast. I let a single tear fall, not for him, but for the years I had allowed someone else to define my worth. Then I smiled, wiped it away, and stepped out. The house was theirs no longer, but more importantly, it had never been theirs to command. By evening, the calls stopped. They were furious, yes, but powerless. Their fury had no weapon against the shield I had built around myself. I had taken their leverage, their sense of entitlement, and rendered it meaningless, and in that there was sweetness, quiet but undeniable. I didn't have to confront them to win. My silence had done it for me. That night, I sat alone in my new apartment, a small space I had rented while figuring out my next steps. The moonlight spilled across the floor, silver and calm. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. The fire of grief had transformed into a steady warmth, one that promised freedom, dignity, and control over my own life. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about cruelty. It was about reclaiming the power that had been stolen, about standing tall when the world expected me to crumble. And as I sipped my tea and listened to the city hum beyond my windows, I knew something essential. I had survived betrayal, endured greed, and emerged unbroken. And now the future was mine. The apartment felt different now. Smaller than the house we had shared, yes, but lighter, untouched by betrayal, free of his memory, and most importantly, mine alone. The walls were bare, the floors empty, and for the first time, silence didn't sting, it comforted me. It was a sound I could finally call home. I walked to the window and looked down at the street, where life moved on obliviously. People hurried past, caught up in their routines, their trivial grievances, their fleeting dramas. I had once been part of a world built on pretense, on false smiles and hidden lies. But now I wasn't part of it. I had reclaimed myself. In the weeks following the sale of the house, I found myself rediscovering the small joys I had abandoned. Morning walks through the park, feeling the sun warm my face, became a ritual. Coffee in quiet cafes, books in my lap, and music filling the spaces between thoughts reminded me that the world still held beauty, even if he had not. I allowed myself to feel joy again, tentative at first, then stronger, surer. The calls from his family became infrequent, then stopped entirely. I no longer felt a need to respond. Their fury, their entitlement, their attempts to control me, they had no effect. I had severed the cords they thought tied me, leaving them frustrated and powerless. While I moved forward, revenge, I realized, was not a confrontation. It was a reclaiming of life, and I had claimed mine fully. One evening, I treated myself to a small ritual. I opened a bottle of wine I had saved for a special occasion and poured a glass. Standing in the middle of my empty living room, I raised it. To freedom, I whispered, smiling at my own reflection in the window. The gesture felt absurdly simple, yet it carried the weight of years, the weight of betrayal, grief, and resilience. I sipped slowly, savoring the quiet triumph that came not from hurting anyone, but from protecting myself. I began to reconnect with the people I had neglected in the haze of marriage and loss. Friends who had quietly offered support became my lifeline. Laughter returned, light and unguarded, as if reminding me that life could be gentle too. I traveled to small towns I had dreamed of seeing, wandered through forests, sat by riversides, and allowed the wind to carry away pieces of sorrow that had clung stubbornly to me. And still, I carried the lessons of betrayal like a talisman. I understood now that love was fragile, that trust was precious, and that entitlement, whether of a lover or family, was a test of resilience. I had survived, and I had learned that revenge, when paired with dignity, could be sweeter than rage. I didn't need to humiliate them. I didn't need to confront them. I only needed to live fully, and in that I had triumphed. Months later, standing on a quiet beach, watching waves crash and retreat, I felt a clarity I had never known before. The pain of loss had not vanished, nor should it, but it had transformed into strength. The man who had betrayed me, the family who had demanded my resources, they were now part of the past, powerless to affect the life I was building. My grief had been the fire that forged my resilience, and my actions had been the steel that protected it. I inhaled deeply, feeling the salt and wind fill my lungs, and smiled. There would be love again, perhaps, but not dependent on anyone else. There would be laughter, joy, and peace, and above all, there would be freedom, the kind that comes not from revenge alone, but from reclaiming the life that is rightfully yours. I turned away from the waves and walked along the shore, letting the sand mold beneath my feet, each step a reminder that I was moving forward. I was no longer a widow defined by betrayal. I was a woman who had endured, who had reclaimed, who had transformed pain into empowerment. The past would always whisper, but it no longer had a voice loud enough to dictate my life. And in that moment, I knew something unshakable. I was free, and no one, not him, not his family, would ever take that from me again.